Welcome, everybody, wherever you happen to be on this globe, whether it's the morning, the afternoon, or the evening. Welcome to the second official episode of Pluralia Dialogos, where we are continuing the work that Edward Lazansky and I began 6 months ago, as the world was sincerely needing more discussions focused upon solutions and diagnostics pertaining to causation. What was really behind a lot of the turmoil that was pushing us into a very dark phase of world history, and what could be done about it? What lessons historically do we have to glean from that could help us sort out contextually what got us here and what could be done creatively to break out of this path of self-annihilation? So these discussions have been very good. We were on the 19th official Peace Roundtable itself, and again, we're very happy that that Pluralia has teamed up with us to feature this as an aspect of their work promoting multipolarity, dialogue amongst civilizations, and peace. So today, I think everyone knows that we have three special guests whom I will bring on right now. The first being Martin Sieff. Martin Sieff, a longtime geopolitical analyst, historian, journalist with the Washington Times, a correspondent for 20 years there, who has hobnobbed with the powerful and has lived to talk about it. He's got a lot to say. I'm always fascinated to hear Marty's take on world events. And Marty, thank you for joining us. Garland Nixon, a very just an insightful, well-rounded commentator, analyst who I've spoken with now for a number of years. I've been following. He has a variety of shows where he's really been able to bring a lot of historic and geopolitical context to all sorts of events that are often treated out of context myopically by foolish commentators who like to speak more than they think. Garland has been able to break free of that mold and help other people do the same. So Garland, thank you so much for coming on today. I really appreciate hearing what you're going to have to say about this. And finally, Joaquin Flores, a good friend I've known now for many, many years. The head of the Center for Syncretic Studies. He curates the New Resistance media platform on Telegram, and I'm always fascinated to hear Joaquin's take on world events. So, gentlemen, I know that I invited all three of you guys to come on today, originally, to talk about the dangers of color revolution tactics coming home to roost in the United States. We've seen little sparkles of this, little bursts of this in the wake of the George Floyd murders. We've smelled some hands of certain agencies that were tied to George Soros, indirectly through things like the NED. We've seen these tactics at least used to great destruction in other countries, and so seeing similar patterns emerge in the United States, utilizing useful idiots like Antifa and other things, has been disturbing. Originally, the idea was to talk about what was the strategy behind the No Kings movement, these hundreds, if not over 1,000 protests that didn't seem to turn out terrible. This is not the worst case scenario in any means that many had discussed. I was also afraid that this might be a lot worse. Perhaps a mass casualty event, as is often planned, would possibly have been programmed into this to spark what could lead to a civil war in America. I don't think it's off the table, but obviously we're still going to talk about that. But due to the events over the past 72 hours or so, especially since Israel decided to launch gung-ho onto striking Iran, that's really taken the front stage. So I think today what we'll do is merge both of those events. I know that Mike Pompeo recently gave an absurd, but I think revealing interview, which if I have it here, I'll play it. Yeah, I'll just play it. Where in his mind, these are two events that are kind of linked. The potential race for nuclear war in the Middle East. He doesn't say it that way, but I mean, this is the implications of this. And the developments inside of the United States as well. So let me just run that. And then I'd like to hear all three of you guys, each one maybe starting with Marty, then Joaquin, then Garland, or however you guys wish. Just give your takes on where the world is at right now. But first, before we do that, let's hear a word from Mike Pompeo.
Careful who you were around in terms of large events, Jewish events. I mean, this sounds like we've gone backwards decades in terms of the threat on Jewish lives. But that's exactly what this is also about.
Harris, I actually think it's just the converse of that. I do agree this could be a very high tension, stressful, and indeed there may be an event somewhere in the world. It's not just the missiles or drones they'll fly to Israel, but the Iranian IRGC, the very leadership the Israelis destroyed last night, has been working in nearly every country around the world, including the United States of America, to plant little terror cells all across the world. Hezbollah was doing the same. So this will be a very difficult period. But in the end, this was not a reckless attack, but indeed what they did was decent and just and righteous, and will reduce risk to the Jewish diaspora around the world. And for Israel and for the United States of America, a really good set of outcomes are in the offing. So long as Israel is prepared to finish the task, and as long as the world unites to provide continued deterrence and defense to prevent Iran from conducting all kinds of attacks. I think of cyber threats that will probably be projected around the world too. Iranians have a great cyber program. So lots of vectors for them to respond. We all need to be alert and responsive and do everything we can to deter them from.
Okay, I had to stop that. All right, so that's the thing that Mike Pompeo, by the way, I don't know whether he's on keto or something. He's looking really healthy.
It's Ozempic. I think it's Ozempic. Yeah, okay. Ozempic is like this. Yeah, it's like this celebrity fad, but it like withers away all the fat and everything. It's really bad. He looks bad. I think he looked better fat, personally.
Trump calls it the fat shot.
News for me.
Yeah, Trump calls it the fat shot. Remember, he said, "Yeah, my buddy in the other, he was getting his fat shot." So Trump just simplifies it.
He's funny.
Well, he certainly still has a fat head, and in terms of, yeah, just some of what he said is just over the top. But that being said, he's warning of Iranian terrorist cells that are going to cause disruptions, cyber attacks. But ultimately, what was done by Israel is just and good, and it will reduce danger to the Jewish diaspora. All that to say, I'd love to get you guys get your thoughts on what's going on. So maybe today, let's launch with Garland. Garland first. So where are we at? Where do you think this? What's your take on this? What should the audience be thinking about today?
I'll put it like this. If you look at conflicts, right, and you look at terrorist activities, I mean, and you can't talk about this without talking about what happened just a few weeks ago in Ukraine, right? And I mean, in Russia with the attacks there, just a little time on. And that is that the weak party is the one that does terrorist attacks. So it clearly in Russia, always the weak one is that does, the powerful one doesn't have to. It can use conventional means to win. So there was a terrorist attack in trains and things like that. And that was clearly an exhibition of the weakness of NATO. That's all they can do anymore. So they're really hurting in Ukraine right now. So meanwhile, Trump, that's not my war. It wouldn't have happened. But this one is. This one's all mine. And a day and a half into it, Trump's now start on Truth Social and saying, I talked to Putin and said this war should end. I think, he's realizing that they miscalculated, that, they kind of got what we call in the street a sucker punch on Iran. But if you don't knock a guy out with a sucker punch, he's going to be pissed. And he's going to start wailing on you. As people know in self-defense, what do they say if somebody attacks you? Punch your way out of it, right? Start wheeling back. And Iran apparently is punching their way out of it very, very, quite adeptly. And Trump has gotten himself into a mess that he can't get himself out of. Meanwhile, we got the Leah Greenberg and Ezra Levin protest here, right? That's all it is. Let me tell you real quick, because I was a former investigator. The very first thing I did when they had these first so-called protest a month or so back, I said, well, I got to see who's behind it. So I searched into it, and it was indivisible.org. And so I started researching that. There's two people, Ezra Levin and Leah Greenberg. These are the people who are behind indivisible.org. These are people who are on all of the news shows talking about it, which is a giveaway. If there's a protest and you're on MSNBC and CNN and they're putting the people on all along, you got to know it's a psyop at that point. But at any rate, so they're on there. Oh, it's great. And all they said was, we're against Trump and we're against, back then it was Musk. And they had a sign that literally said, hands off NATO. Literally. They were protesting with a hands off NATO sign. Okay. But when you looked at it, I started looking on behind it, and I found that what's interesting is Leah Greenberg, she worked with Tom Perello. She worked on when he ran for office. She worked with Tom. She was like his chief of staff or something close to that. When he was in Congress, she worked with him. When those two people got married, Tom Piarello was the MC. Tom, whatever, Piarello, I think he was the MC at their wedding. He was the guy that had the mic and told everything what to do at their wedding. And immediately after their wedding, the New York Times ran an article. Anybody can look it up. And it was just about them too. It was about, look at this great young Jewish couple and they're getting married. And you're thinking, what the hell is the New York Times just randomly doing an article about this couple? So she's tight with Piarello, whatever, however you pronounce it. He leaves Congress. He becomes the CEO of the Open Society Foundation for George Soros. And so these are the people who are running the No Kings thing. They ran the last one from indivisible.org. And right now, if you go to No Kings and you start searching through that for, it said spokespeople available for interviews, Leah Greenberg and Ezra Levin. Right. And because the first thing I started doing, I said, well, let me look at nokings.org and let me do a who is search to find out who owns this. I do a who is search, and guess what? A proxy company that hides the person that owns it. So if you look to try to find out who it is that owns the nokings.org website, you'll find that whoever owns it used a proxy company so that you can't find out who owns it. Right. And the top two people. So clearly, it's the next one is Liza Gilbert and Robert Weissman. I see it as a neocon / Zionist operation going on. It's pretty clear. And if you read, what's interesting is if you go to start, I would tell anybody, go to that No Kings website and start looking around. And what you'll find is, number one, there is no substance. They're not asking for something. They're not saying, Martin Luther King, it was like, hey, we want a $2 minimum wage in 1962. I mean, you're going to find that if there's a protest, there's demands. We want Medicare. We want stop the war, whatever it is. Everybody wants something, right? And Martin Luther King, it was very clear. Stop the discrimination and a $2 minimum wage. That's something. Okay, they got nothing. All it is Trump is bad, Trump is evil, we must stand up to Trump. No kings. Well, we don't have a king. What are you talking about, no kings? That doesn't even mean anything. It makes sense. It's bring people together, do whatever you want. Now, I suspect that this is a mobilization effort. They bring all these people together and they mobilize them for the midterms. They mobilize them for whatever. They mobilize them. You're going to see one of the things that's valuable about this, if you know people who are involved in organizing, is you get names, you get organizations together, you get email addresses of millions of people, you get all of this stuff. So when it comes time to do whatever, like I said, whether it's the midterms, whether it's this, whether it's getting some CIA person elected to the Democratic Party, which they seem to do quite regularly, you got all of these names and all this information. So even if let's say the plan is not to get something crazy going on in the street, throw bricks and blah, blah, blah. It is a brilliant organizing option, because you get all of these people together and you can now use that and herd them towards whatever else you want. So it works. Sometimes what you see is not right now we're going to take this and do something. It's a long-term effort to slowly build and organize and get all of these people together to get them in a particular direction. If you want to blow something up or whatever, that's fine. But it's not always as easy as it looks. If you look at one of the things that I find interesting, like I said, I've done a lot on this No Kings event, and there's one giveaway. If you go to the about, there's something that says training, right? And you look down that No Kings, it is exactly what they did in Ukraine. When you go down this thing, there's everything, what you want to do, how to do it. There's a toolkit. They got this toolkit. What is No Kings? Why we're mobilizing? Then host your own No Kings mobilization. They go on. Resources for host, event hosting, messaging. Here's all of our messaging. Rosters and graphics. You want your graphics? They give you your graphics. You go further down. Insurance. Are you hosting something and you need insurance? Here's the companies that we've got for insurance. It is exactly what they did in every color revolution. They bring people together. They set it all up. They give you all the toolkits, everything you need to be a part of it. And I think Here's what I suspect. We saw the first anti-Elon Musk Trump thing. Now with the no kings, you'll notice all of this stuff is completely devoid of substance. That's the giveaway. We're not asking for anything. We don't want anything. We just want to bring you together with some hollow, worthless slogan. No kings, and especially a slogan that means nothing. We can't have it interpreted as something valuable. We're going to give you a toolkit, and we're going to continue to build on this over and over and over. That's what they did in Ukraine. They even admitted that they spent $5 billion on it. They had workshops where they brought young people in and they trained them this kind of stuff. Next, you're going to see workshops. You're going to see all of this stuff. And I'm not saying the traditional color revolution where, we get something going and we overthrow the government, but they've got slicker ways of doing it here. So to me, if you look at this stuff, one other thing, on me and a number of other people, when it came to the first ones that they did against Musk. And again, I'm a lefty. I'm no Musk or Trump fan. It is what it is, right? But my point is, the first one, when you saw they had a list of all of the groups that were there, allied with, and they looked like the same graphics. It looked like this, they looked like this. Most of them that the same people had done the graphics and the logos and all of that, right? But they were all active. You could click on the links. You could go to each one of their partners, and you could look at them, and you could find out that they were some kind of a scam, right? Every one of them. And me and several other people did it. So you know what they did this time? This time, like I said, A, they used the proxy so you can't find out who owns this, nokings.org. B, they made them all inactive so you can't click on any of their partners now and you have to search it and find out and all that kind of stuff. And you'll find out that most of these things are, a lot of their organizations, most of them are completely hollow. It's like these made up groups with some weird made up name. And some of them will have really one web page, one like you go to their web page and there's
that's it, yeah.
A couple other things, and you search up and down and there's nothing else there.
Yeah.
So bottom line, it's obvious that there's a game being played here. I think people may err. A lot of people thought, okay, they're going to do this, and then they're going to have violence, and they're going to use that. Now they if you notice, Trump is using that to say, well, I guess we need to bring Palantir in, right? Sure, they're going to use that for that, but it might be an error to think they're going to use the typical, we're going to have this and we're going to have violence, and then we'll use the violence. I think this is more long-term plan. I think it's, and the fact that they had one, a month or so later, they got another one. I think you can begin to look that every 6 weeks or so, there's another protest, and they're going to build this. Now, this is building towards something. But this is a different kind of animal than just let's have a protest, let's put some pallets of bricks and have people throw bricks around. I think there's a longer term thing going on here. That's my thoughts.
Yeah, I agree. I agree too. And it seems like these are sort of like before tsunami, you've got various waves hitting the shore, and then each one is building up momentum. And I think that there is something that is planned. And I think if we are not aware of this higher long-term arc, then we will be susceptible to falling for all sorts of traps that'll be put in our place that could accelerate that. I do agree with that. And on that note too, I was just noticing that, as you pointed out, the harmonization of certain techniques, the signage. I was just reading an article going through how the signs used in the No Kings events, at least the ones in LA actually was just slightly different, but similar. They were all produced by the Party for Socialism and Liberation.
PSL, yeah.
Run by, Neville Roy Singham, who's like this billionaire in Chicago who identifies as a socialist somehow, who's behind pouring tons of cash and capital into making this stuff happen. So you got all sorts of weird elements. And I was curious too about Karen Bass. What do you think about her relationship to NED? I mean, it's like, is this an active thing? Did we find that there's active NED operations, or is it just a coincidence that Karen Bass and the lieutenant governor of California, who's also tied to it through her role as former ambassador to Hungary, where she interfaced with this thing on a number of points? Or is there any relationship there to what's going on in California, or is that not discovered yet?
I'll say this, I used to do a show on KPFK in California, and I started talking about Karen Bass and her, relations to the regime change machine and NED on them there. And I found that within a few weeks, they decided that they didn't need my services anymore. And I lost my show on KPFK, which I didn't care because I was going to say what I said. What I got was out. But I talked about that in California on KPFK. And we think we're going to go in a different direction. Wow. We're going to extend the show before you, which I saw it coming, but I got it out. But yeah, it's obvious that, let's face it, Hollywood is a very, very integral part of the regime change of this whole monster of this machine. So you got to have Los Angeles under the thumb of one of your operatives because Hollywood's there, and it's a big part of the operation now. I think that's a big part of it. The other thing, I'll add one more thing, and that is about that's interesting, and that is, it came out that apparently Trump called Putin and talked about the Middle East, and he said, we want to end this war in Israel. And 24 hours ago, he was like, this is great, this is wonderful, and I made it happen. And then, Israel gets bashed up by a bunch of, Shaheed drones and stuff like that. And all of a sudden he says, a day later, I think the war needs to end. So that kind of tells you, to me, that his people internally are saying, hey, man, this ain't going, we may have miscalculated. And here's the big thing I'll say, because I was going to say this. Look, let's just say, for the sake of arguments, it's even, Stephen. Let's just say Israel hits 50 spots a day. Iran hits 50 spots a day. Iran's a whole lot bigger. They got a whole lot more 50 spots that could be hit. If that happens for 15 days, you got no Israel. At that point, if this goes on for a week or two, just as it is, if it's even Steven, you got to know that effectively Israel's infrastructure. Now, how does Israel where are their planes going to take off from when their bases are being flattened? Israel is being put in a really, really bad situation here. And Trump's gloating has turned into, we got to get it out of this. And he's reaching for, the reverse gear as quick as 24 hours later. We got to get out of this. Meanwhile, his supporters, a lot of them are saying, don't you get in this, Donald Trump. Don't you do this. We don't want you in that. So Donald Trump has painted himself in a nasty, nasty corner. And he pushed the Iranians in a corner. And the last thing I'll say about it is this. Look, the Western air defense system was exposed in Ukraine as lacking to be charitable. When you're fighting against somebody that all they do is, and when two entities are a long ways from each other, and really all they can do is throw stuff back and forth, there ain't going to be no ground war here. And your air defense systems are lacking, and they got a lot of missiles planning on it, and they got to test them twice with drones, and they know everything that's going on. This is going to be catastrophic for the Trump administration. I think he made a big mistake here.
Let me turn this over to Joaquin. Joaquin, you are a proficient geopolitical analyst, as I pointed out at the beginning, and I think most of the viewers watching right now understand this already. They've probably followed you. Color revolutions have been something you've really developed an expertise at diagnosing and unraveling. Now, one thing, you're also from California. You are a former union organizer who has already had direct experience organizing protests. You've been inside of it. You're now based in Serbia, and you've painted a picture, I think, really, really well over the last years pertaining to what's really shaping the world and pushing us in a certain direction. I've noticed that there is another theme that ties in what's going on in the U.S. with Iran, which is that Benjamin Netanyahu, he just delivered a speech calling for the Iranian people who love freedom and democracy to overthrow their tyrannical mullahs and declare liberty. And we've got the former, Shah, or the former Shah's son, Reza Pahlavi, or whatever his name is, coming out as well. He's being marketed right now to promote as well, not just the Iranian diaspora, but especially trying to get to provoke Iranians to overthrow their government. They're trying, it seems, another Soros-style Iranian Green Revolution 2.0, the thing that failed like over a decade ago that didn't really go anywhere. They seem to be trying that again as part of their operation to destroy Iran. Do you think this is going to work? What do you think is behind this, and where you think the world is at right now? What should people be thinking about based on these things we've been discussing?
Yeah, first of all, thank you for the question. And I'm glad that it's a different question, because I have to say that Garland said about 80% of what I came prepared to say, and he's spot on. I have to fully endorse his analysis, number one. So yeah, with Iran, I think that really what you're seeing there is there's not really a chance of like resparking the Green Revolution. I think that the most that I take from Netanyahu's speech is that he had, basically an intern or a consultant in messaging that's like, you can't make this look like you're against Iranian people. You have to make this look like it's humanitarian regime change, kind of from like that whole George Bush, democracy building or nation building rap. I don't see this like connecting to them being able to activate, cells like they did, like connected to MEK or, the Green Revolution. And I really think that the mitigating efforts from that period, from like 2008 through 2015, having Rouhani in there, having the reformist track also, I think brought people through this kind of arc of exploring what could happen with the JCPOA. As people know, in my opinion, Iran actually did not want the JCPOA, but they needed to walk their own oligarchy through the paces. Because it's a class society, it's a capitalist society. They do have a strong state, and they do have a social state with theocratic underpinnings. But it is a bourgeois capitalist society, and they have private ownership of the means of production over large scale industry and corporations. They have a big state industry, don't get me wrong, but they have individual billionaire oligarchs that would love to integrate for their own personal reasons into Western capital markets. And I think that would have been disastrous for the Iranian Revolution and its future. So it's, I think about these things as like long games and like playing through a lot of the steps. You got to walk people through the motions. You got to show them what's possible and not possible. And so I think a lot of the social discontent that was rising in Iran, there have been moderately successful moves to address some of these issues of wealth or income inequality in Iran. This had been growing, of course, along with GDP growth. You had an over focus on economic growth and capital concentration at the expense of some of the rural parts of the country, which also simultaneously are the most, as they say in the West, hardline or whatever. But let's say they're more adamant about the government that's there. They're the more supportive of that government that's there. So, when the Israel first struck a few days ago, you had some, at least media depicting protests in Iran. And, the Iranian media was saying that these were protests in support of that Iran needs to, respond militarily and in a very big way. And I had questions about that because that can go both ways. You don't want people, especially outside of Iran, trying to dictate or set the tempo of what Iran is going to be viewed as successful or not. In other words, you don't want to egg them on into over attacking. That is really very similar to what we saw from Benjamin Netanyahu when he, I think, falsely claimed that 80 or 90% of Iran's ballistic missiles were destroyed in the attack on the 13th or 13th. And because it was a decision of the Iranian side not to hit Iran with everything that they have, right? This was, of course, cynical manipulation on the part of Netanyahu, trying to call it like a bluff and to force Iran to respond harder than they did, because they're capable of responding harder than they did. We know that militarily, and yet they didn't. So why the reserve? Why are they holding back? And it's because we've entered a strange kind of hybrid where we used to talk about like war is the continuation of politics by other means. Now we're really seeing, war as the diplomacy itself, like war as the diplomacy, as a negotiation. So that's why you've seen the strange kind of like first Israel attacks and let's wait 6 hours. What's the political fallout? 10 hours later, Iran responds. All right, what happened? The dust settles. What's the political fallout? What are people at? 6 hours later, Israel responds. right? Then 10 hours later, Iran responds. So it's been a very strange, pace. And that gives me optimism that it won't blow out of proportion, and that what we have seen right now has been relatively measured. And in regards to this point that, Trump is saying now, hey, we want the sides to stop fighting. It was actually Netanyahu who first broached that subject, very much like Zelensky calling for a ceasefire, demanding a ceasefire, as we say, but yet, holding to the terms that call the question of why we're having a war in the first place, right? In other words, like for Zelensky, it's like, we're calling for peace, we're calling for ceasefire. Why? Because they can't take it anymore. You see, the Iranian population is far more prepared for this type of protracted conflict than the Israeli population is. And then, of course, to the metrics of Garland's points about the geography, population, and economic differences, of course, only compound that point and underscore it, I think, some more. So, when I see the things happening in the United States through the lens of, just color revolutions with the No Kings thing, one of the things that jumped out at me was the same thing that Nixon said, that, we don't have this was happening right as the U.S. is bombing Iran, right? And to have the PSL be involved in this, well, what happened to the Answer Coalition? I know that you had, PSL, Gloria La Riva, Workers' World, there's some splits, whatever, but what happened to Answer? What happened to No Imperialism? What happened, right? So there was a very interesting master's thesis that a student wrote in 2009. I don't recall the name of it, but it was brilliant in that he pointed out that the anti-war movement, right, that people thought was the left, the communists, the anarchists, the anti-imperialists, the anti-war labor crowd, as soon as Obama got elected, dried up. Not a single march, not a single anti-war movement, nothing, while Obama continued all these neocon wars and occupations. So looking at the No King stuff, they're like, again, there's no talk about the real issues in America, the housing crisis, wages, healthcare, or imperialism and war, right? Which only increases wealth disparity inside the United States, by the way. I mean, imperialism abroad, means austerity at home. So this is, I think, the crux of the subject. And it shows that the Democrat Party is actually losing. They're not relying on that base. And I think that a lot of the economic union left stuff, people are actually looking at Trump and tariffs, and they're looking at Trump and, bring industry home or whatever, make America great again. And so you no longer even have an answer to that from the so-called left, and definitely not from the Democrats, which are to the right of the left, right? But, what you have to appreciate in all of this is that here you have a moment, right, where you can say, boom, this is showing like Trump, the imperialist, Trump attacking Iran. Look, the mask has fallen off. Like that could be their narrative. That's not my analysis, but that could be their script. They're not going with it, right? They're like no kings, right? And then they tried to do no kings in Canada. They had to change it to no tyrants. Oops, why? Canada has a king, right? So it's like, what is going on? But there's a lot of signs that that the regime change operations, like, internally against Iran are no longer being seriously considered. And one of those things is that historically MEK was based out of Iraq, and they would penetrate through the mountains and into Iran. But the political scene inside of Iraq has changed, and there's less room for them to maneuver and kind of hide out outside of Iran. So secondly, I think some of the social issues that gave rise to the legitimate parts of that movement, some of those social issues have been mitigated, have been resolved. We've kind of stabilized and moved past the 2008 FAO World Food Index price crisis that was driving the Arab Spring and the color revolutions at that time. So I think that if we look at like the food price index in Iran is more stable than it was, and that's a real strong indicator of like what degree are you going to have authentic grassroots movements that could be co-opted in color revolutionary ways.
Yeah, a lot of really potent points you just brought up there. I'm going to shift this to Marty, and I'm going to reframe a couple of things here. There's a lot of contradictory messaging, both obviously from within the U.S. administration. At some points, we've heard positive remarks pertaining to U.S. Support for this maneuver that Israel's chosen. The Israelis have tried to make it very loudly known, or at least believed, that they did this with the support and collusion of Trump, and that Trump's efforts to I got a little quote from Israeli officials who said, "We had a clear U.S. green light," adding that reports of Trump's restraining Israel were planned to deceive. Now, that's coming from the Israelis. That's coming from a faction within Israel as well, because I'm not even seeing like a full coherence on what to do, even coming from Israel itself. We have the head of the Shin Bet, Ronan Bar, who just resigned
from his
yesterday,
post. Right? Yeah.
Huh?
He stepped down today. Yeah.
He stepped down. Yeah. So you got people who you'd think would be in lockstep who are resigning, indicating there's definitely not coherence, not consensus. Then you got Trump as well coming out very clearly saying that he doesn't support this type of thing. And he gets on a call with Putin. Lastly, you also have the Iranians themselves, even though they've been, I mean, I think it's been a really violent, destructive blow they've suffered. I mean, a big chunk of their leadership has been wiped out. That's terrible. And they, but that being said, I hear messaging like the Iranian foreign minister just saying that Iran will stop striking Israel on the condition that it completely stops all aggression against the Islamic Republic, saying that they want to restore the U.S., or he's at least saying, I don't think he even represents all of the Iranian point of view, but at least he's saying it, representing a certain faction, that he wants to restart and keep alive the U.S. Iran negotiations and the nuclear deal with which Russia has been trying to salvage too. They came in with a really amazing offer, I think a very sane offer, saying that they're going to help build like 8 nuclear reactors for Iran just a few days ago before this thing struck, and process all of the enriched fuel for the Iranians for free. So I mean, like there's definitely a lot in play. So Marty, where do you see all this? Do you think that there is some rhyme and reason behind the scenes moving things in a more sane direction, or is it more chaos that's pulling things forward?
The answer is both. Because the key division is it. Can you hear me okay, guys?
Sure.
The key division, I think, is very clear. And it's a personal confusion, which is not all bad by any means, in the mind of the President of the United States. The President has surrounded himself with idiots and hawks and menaces to the world. But the President himself sincerely wants peace. He hasn't thought it through. If you look at his economic policies, they're actually working much better than any of the mainstream media gives them credit for. And this is a very major issue. The one thing that can derail the president's policies in real terms right now is war in the Middle East. So what the Israelis are claiming Trump wants would destroy the president's main policies. And I think, Matt, your assessment about these leaks coming A, from Israel, only from Israel, and B, as you say, not from all of Israel and not from all of the government, because there are so many ways we can go on this. But first of all, I want to endorse completely, associate myself completely with the courageous and brilliant and analyses we've just heard from both Joaquin and Garland. And of course, they're old friends, so I admit bias. But they're completely correct. But there's one area where, alas, I disagree with both of them. They're the optimistic ones. I'm much more pessimistic about how far things can go. But a key point both of you have made, and Garland, your analysis on this is brilliant and clearer than any one thing I've ever seen before. Again, you have this wonderful, unique life experience in scholarship, in the media, in analysis, where your work has been outstanding, and also your forensic work in law enforcement, which comes into this in an enormous way too. If I may digress slightly, it comes into my career too, because I'm a newsman. I've been a newsman all my life. And my father was a piano tuner who rose in a piano company to an executive position in basically a British version of Sears Roebuck. He started at the very bottom and rose quite high in it. But it wasn't what he wanted to be. He wanted to be a cop. He wanted to be a detective. He'd served in Irish military intelligence during World War II. He liked the work. He set himself up as a private eye, really an Irish Philip Marlowe in Belfast after World War II. He discovered, as Marlowe did in the classic novels by Raymond Chandler, it was a good way to starve. So he went back to his first expertise in Ireland, which was tuning pianos. after being a private eye. But all his closest friends for most of his life were retired or active police officers. And he was fascinated by this. He didn't read The Economist or The Times. He read the American True Detective magazines. But you have that perception too, and that sensitivity, Garland. And the key point you keep bringing back to, and I want to take it a huge leap further, no kings. Why the name? As Joaquin pointed out, in Canada, there's no new king's agitation, and yet there is a king, and there's no agitation against it. And as you pointed out, Matt, the empire is strengthening its hold on Canada, or at least trying to do so, and yet no protests. By contrast, what do we see in America? We see no kings, and yet no kings is a head without a body, as you have pointed out, Garland. And again, that's the detective coming out, the forensic work. What's behind the label? There is nothing behind the label. This tells us a lot. First of all, what is the aim of no kings? I will tell you, they are targeting the President of the United States. He is the big, bad, evil king. An atmosphere is being created to prepare the political and emotional context across 1/3 billion people in the United States, and they're all swallowing it, especially the young people, to eliminate the President of the United States. Because with all his contradictions and shortcomings and human flaws and faults, he is basically a decent man who is standing courageously for decent policies in his own fitful way, even though he keeps appointing the wrong people around him. It is to eliminate the President of the United States. Why do I say this? I'm of an age. I'm the oldest one of the four of us here. And I've been around a long time. And I was already a teenage boy in Ireland when President Kennedy was my hero. He was the hero of all my thinking friends in Northern Ireland, as far away as that. He was a hero. He became a great inspirational leader in his time. The shock of his death was devastating. But what we saw, and in those days, British media was not a horrific Orwellian joke it has become today. The BBC itself was a model of extraordinarily diverse and outspoken reporting and analysis in the 1960s and early 70s. It gradually became shut down over half a century. But then it was different. So we saw, and it was reported on clearly in Britain, the climate of hate, which we now know is being deliberately constructed as the pretext and preparation for the elimination of the President of the United States. Even to prepare the way that yet another lone gunman, and remember the assassination of President Lincoln, the assassination of President Garfield, the assassination of President McKinley, were all claimed to be by lone gunmen. This is not a new lie. The lies have been around a long time, and because they get away with them, they keep trotting out the same lies again. It is always a lone gunman. It is always a lone gunman. But I saw that atmosphere as a teenage boy being created around the President of the United States as a preparation for his elimination. And I saw the same phenomenon twice more with my own eyes in my professional career years later. In 1981, I visited Egypt. In February 1981, just as a private individual, I was at the bottom of the ladder in Northern Irish journalism at the time, but I had pretensions, absurd pretensions, even I recognized that I might get somewhere covering international affairs. And I visited Egypt. And I didn't know anyone. I didn't have to do research, but just drinking in the bars of Cairo with other Western expatriates, the atmosphere among everyone you talked to was unanimous. President Nasser was removed by a convenient heart attack when his policies had totally failed, and everybody realized they couldn't fight the Israelis back in 1970. But now Sadat's opposite policies of peace with Israel, which he was following after the significant successes the Egyptians had achieved, both first militarily but then diplomatically in 1973 war. And then Sadat, of course, went to Israel in 1977, started the peace process. But in domestic Egyptian terms, that had run out of steam. And there was a widespread expectation that Sadat was going to be removed, not by the Americans. They wanted him. Not by the Israelis, they wanted him, but by his own deep state, who didn't want him. And I came back from that trip, and my feeling was, if so many people who are dependent on the goodwill of the security services and the Egyptian government are openly talking this way in all the hotels and bars of Cairo, the president of Egypt's days must be numbered. But of course, I was just a kid. I didn't have standing with the New York Times or the Washington Post or the Times of London or the Daily Telegraph. I didn't know from shit they thought. So I was laughed to scorn, right? But what happened? On October the 6th, 1981, the president of Egypt was assassinated by breakaway Islamist troops in a march to celebrate his own military victory over Israel, again, publicly in the light of the world. But the political context for this had been carefully prepared for a year at least beforehand. And it happened a third time on the other side of the Middle East border. Yitzhak Rabin's policy with, nobody likes to remember it now, Rabin has been recast as a saint for peace with the Palestinians. In fact, the peace process with the Palestinians was breaking down. But Rabin had another peace process going that he knew would work because it was with a man who he trusted and respected and who trusted and respected him. And that was the president of Syria. And Itamar Rabinovich, who's dead now, unfortunately, who was Rabin's expert on Syria and chief strategic and diplomatic advisor, said afterwards that secretly President Assad and Prime Minister Rabin had agreed on a lasting peace between Israel and Syria, as part of which Israel would give up the Golan Heights back to Syria, and Rabin was going to do it. So what did we find? We find, first of all, that there were mass rallies in Israel. Joaquin, I see you remember this all too well already. You might even want to take up the story from me. There were Likud, right-wing nationalist rallies in Israel in which coffins with the name Rabin on them were openly displayed. The current Prime Minister of Israel accused the then Prime Minister of Israel of being a traitor to the Jewish people and the Israeli people. Of course, Netanyahu bent over backwards to say afterwards he did not call for the assassination per se. But he accused the Prime Minister of being a traitor, of destroying the security of the state. And what did we find? We find yet again that the security cordon around the Prime Minister of Israel, which is supposed to be rock solid, suddenly didn't exist anymore, just as it didn't exist for President Kennedy on those streets of Dallas on November the 22nd, 1963, and suddenly how it vanished in front of the president of Egypt, when to his own astonishment, his own troops marching in front of him, and suddenly a bunch of them simply turn around and storm against him and start opening an automatic fire with him, and there's nobody to shoot back at them. All of a sudden, the seal of protection, the magic shield of protection is withdrawn. And we saw that in a couple of, at least, attempts, which might even have just been warnings against President Trump when he was running for re-election. There were 2 real assassination attempts, and a local county sheriff in California, in a routine check of a car, noticed none of these attacks were foiled by the FBI. Not one of them. None of them by the CIA. None of them by the Secret Service. None of them by our wonderful federal forces. It was always local law enforcement or ordinary patriotic people in crowds who prevented the assassinations. And this is what I see being prepared now. I think this explains the mystery of no kings. It explains why there is no policy to no kings. You don't need a policy. You don't want a policy. You want to condition people in a Pavlovian way, the way Aldous Huxley said they needed to be conditioned. You put it in their brains. No kings, no kings. Trump's the king. Trump is evil. Trump must be removed. This was brought home for me a few weeks ago when I got a letter from a friend in the Middle East who has always been a man of my age, a man who is a politically moderate man. At least I always took him for such. And he had a solution for all the ills and woes of the world. Oh, if only we could magically remove Putin and Trump, how wonderful everything would be, and there would be instant peace everywhere. It's a lie, of course. It's the opposite. The very fact that the president of Russia and the president of the United States will talk to each other for 2.5 hours on the phone and then talk to each other again after the president of the United States has been publicly accused, praised even by Israeli sources for supposedly going along with her. I think, again, Joaquin's assessment here, it is hugely important, your insight, Joaquin. I fully, again, endorse and agree with it. Not that you need that or that anyone will listen to me, but it should be plastered across the internet, your insight there. This is another effort to maneuver the president into the United States into letting off a world war. And I also see it close hand here. Where we live in New Jersey, in the eastern seaboard of the United States. And what do we see? We see within the Jewish community here, there is existential terror because the Jewish community in America, who do not want war, or think they do not want war, are being mobilized into a state of terror to support the very policies that will bring the catastrophe which they most fear. Because the Iranians are counterpunchers, and the Iranians have actually had nuclear weapons sufficient to be a deterrent for them. They certainly are to create their own. But I've known for years, and it is common knowledge in the Western intelligence community, that Iran has had nuclear weapons that they bought from mafia elements in Russia, not from the Russian government, not from big, bad, evil President Putin, but in 1991, when things were falling apart under the corrupt and incompetent and useless and tyrannical Boris Yeltsin. And that explains why the Israelis and we have never dared to go after Iran the way we went after Iraq or Syria or Libya and openly invade them or try to topple them. We don't dare to do it because they have enough nuclear weapons already as a deterrent. But so far, at least, they haven't used them. What will make it inevitable for them to use them? If they feel their backs are being pushed to the wall and they have nothing to lose. In other words, these policies of hate and terror and fear towards Iran will create the very catastrophe that they are supposed to prevent. They will provoke the Iranians in retaliation to destroy Tel Aviv. And that in turn brings up something else that nobody has brought up here before, and I never see mentioned anywhere. Iran is not strategically alone. This is not a question simply of the president of Russia or the president of China saying supportive or moderate or responsible remarks or supporting a government good or bad in Tehran. No, it is much deeper than that. Iran several years ago joined the most powerful military alliance in the history of the human race, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which was set up on June the 15th, 2001, with Russia and China. And since then, who has joined the SCO? India has joined it. Pakistan has joined it. And Iran has joined it. In other words, any full-scale attack, nuclear attack, or full-scale US military attack on Iran will provoke not just Russia, not just China, not just both of them, but India as well, and possibly even the traditional rival Pakistan, to support Iran, because they are all members of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. And the Shanghai Cooperation SCO has its own equivalent of NATO's Article 5. An attack on one is an attack on all, and the alliance can be triggered to come in on behalf of the allies.
Marty, could I take what you just said and toss it at Garland and Joaquin?
Of course.
Okay, yeah. So I mean, Marty's just said a lot there,
Yeah.
but I'm going to really just focus on what he just said towards the end point. Obviously, there's increasing discussion about Iran blocking off the Straits of Hormuz, potentially, creating massive disruptions to the international oil market. God knows what else can happen. But at the same time, Marty just made this valid point that we have most of the members of the SCO, and India is being weird right now. There's something strange going on in India where they chose to just, not participate in the condemnation of Israel's attack. But that being said, it's still a military bloc, and Russia, China, Pakistan have all come out very clearly supporting Iran and condemning Israel. So number one, do you see this as a potential of these major nuclear powers being drawn in if this should escalate? Number two, do you see it as a potential that the U.S., because I mean, Israel's begging the U.S. to come in. They don't have a lot to work with. Their Iron Dome isn't really doing much.
Exactly.
Could this escalate to that extent? Is that a real threat? What do you guys think about those dynamics and how that's affecting top-down decision-making currently?
Well, a couple of things right now. Yes, all of those things are potential. I think we all recognized before this conflict started of the danger here, just like Ukraine. These conflicts that are flaring up as the U.S. empire flames out, all of them are the potential for World War III. They're all, Prince Ferdinand or whatever, waiting to happen. A couple of things are going on. I think that's important. I got a couple of comments. Number one, if you look at Trump's latest 9:41 a.m., it's, hey, Israel and Iran should make a deal, and we'll make a deal, just like I got India and Pakistan. It's the same. He's backpedaling like an NFL quarterback, right? He is in his full backpedal right now. Trump wants out. He knows I really believe this. I think we'll find this out eventually, that his military people are saying, man, this ain't going to work. We have made a tremendous strategic miscalculation. And I believe this. There are people saying to Trump, I tried to tell you, buddy. I guarantee there are people that are in Trump's circle saying, I told you this was a mistake. Now, a couple of things that I think are important. So yes, the potential is there. The good thing is Trump's trying to backpedal. Now, let me say this because I saw in the chat, when Marty says, I think Trump wants peace, and people in the chat, oh, you're crazy. Trump doesn't want peace. Let me say this about that. We can think he does or he doesn't want, right? There's an old saying, and that is that the outcome is the intent, right? Yes. I can want peace. Yes. I can want not want peace, right? I'll go to a famous football coach, the Tuna, right, who said, you are what your record says you are. So regardless of whether Trump wants peace, whether doesn't Trump want peace, whatever he wants is irrelevant. What is important is what Trump has produced. And what he has produced so far is the escalations in Russia, yes, and the dangerous attack on Russia's nuclear triad, and the dangerous attack on Russian civilians. And might I add, at a time when he was negotiating with Russia, I'm negotiating with Russia. While I'm doing this, the CIA and whoever are building drone bases inside Russia for a sneak attack. Oh, by the way, I think I'll negotiate with Iran. And while I'm negotiating with Iran, the CIA and Mossad and whoever are building bases for a sneak attack. If I'm China right now, I'm like, yeah, why would I negotiate with these people? And I better look around because I know they're building bases for a sneak attack somewhere in China, and I just got to find them. And this is the next thing I think. If you negotiate with them, you're just giving them clearance. They're getting too close to you. Don't negotiate with them. Push them back. Because negotiations against Russia and China have both been tactics that were used to put you to sleep, to get you to turn your back so I can shove a knife in your thorax. If people had thoraxes, but you get my point, right? So I think that's it. And also you got to say this. Trump's now talking about the deal. And this is critical. How are you going to get a deal with Iran? The IAEA? The IAEA and these other international institutions that the United States have traditionally used as tools of empire, of tools of war, of tools of their machinations are now thoroughly discredited. Who in the heck is going to talk with the IAEA when they're just like, no, if I give you information, you're going to pass the names to them so they can kill these people. The IAEA is done. It's over for that. There's no point in it. It doesn't exist. It's just exposed, which means that if the U.S. points to any, or the West, to any of these institutions and says, let's work with this institution for a deal, anybody in their right mind is going to say, yeah, right. No, I don't think so. One last thing I think is important, and that is this. When Marty talked about killing Trump, you don't have to kill Trump. I did an article. For the same reason, let me say this, for the same reason that there's no way the Russians want to kill Zelensky, right? Thank God, the old saying, thank God for making my enemies fools. Yes. If you got Zelensky on the other side, you want him in office because he's an idiot. I don't want some smart guy in office. I want an idiot in office. So let me say this about Trump. I did a video just a day or two before this, and I said, will Trump attack Iran and commit political suicide? In that, I talked about this. It's not really Trump that the machine is scared of. It's MAGA. Why? Because, as I've said, I got my ideological differences with MAGA. I'm way to the left. Everybody knows that. No shame in my game. But I'm an analyst, so I can't be trapped in my ideology and not be able to analyze this thing, right? Here's the deal. The reality. There is really only one effective, and that's the team term, effective political movement in the United States that can produce at the ballot box, and that's MAGA.
Yes.
MAGA right now, Trump can go to a senator and say, you son of a gun, if you don't vote for this, I'll scream and MAGA will come to your area and you'll lose. And so senators have to be scared of that stuff, no matter how much they want to go up to Trump, right? So what do I want to do? The war in Iran does something far more, whatever the heck, lose or whatever one. And if they can drag Trump into that, what happens? MAGA will go ballistic. MAGA is effectively, always was, an economic movement. MAGA was just the Tea Party. Tea Party came along after 2008. The Tea Party says, what were they really pissed about? The bailouts. Hey, we're getting screwed. Look at that. Everything's going to hell. We're losing our jobs. And you're giving these bastards all of this money. They were pissed. It was all about the bailouts. When Trump came along, he kind of took it. He renamed it to MAGA. He gave him a new brand. He gave him a new logo. And voila, they got a new boss, and it's Trump. And he usurped MAGA, which was, again, got my issues with him culturally, but it was an effective economic political movement.
Yes.
Working class, I might add. Working class. Trump co-opted him. He took him in a different direction. And what Trump wanted to do, what the machine wanted to do, is what Obama did. Most black folks in America were anti-war. Trump grabbed the black community, the liberals, all these anti-war people, dragged them into his bosom and turned them into the war machine, brought them in and delivered them over to the war machine. Yes, support the war machine if you even don't realize. So Obama was able to do that, right? Trump was now, his job was to take MAGA, stuck them in, and then the machine said, okay, we'll turn MAGA into the war machine. And it hadn't been quite so easy, I'll say that. But so now what you're looking at is the machine, if they can draw Trump to get Trump to go into the war, MAGA is going to go ballistic. They're going to go furious. Is there some one portion of MAGA that'll support Trump no matter what? Of course, but it ain't as big as they need it to be an effective political movement. They'll lose enough of MAGA will turn against Trump in fury that they will basically neuter MAGA. And that's what they want to do most importantly. This no king stuff. They want to build up this blind group of people that don't know what the hell they're protesting anyway, so they can point them in any direction, strengthen that, create that. Meanwhile, you got to weaken MAGA as much as you can by distancing MAGA between Trump. You don't have to kill Trump. I'll put it like this. If you ask them, which would we rather kill, Trump or MAGA? They'd rather kill MAGA. Trump is usable. And you look what they did here. I think Trump, doesn't have that much of an ideology. In my opinion, I don't think he's a particular sharp guy and an intuitive politician. And I think they were able to drag him in any direction they want. They got him bragging, yeah, we're attacking Iran. The next day he's like, holy mother of God, what have I done? We need help. A guy like that is not going to be a tremendous threat if they can neuter neuter the machine that he ostensibly runs. And here's the other thing, in a weird way, NATO, which is of course right now there, all of NATO is in the Middle East too, is getting demilitarized now in two areas. Two areas just getting demilitarized. It's getting demilitarized here. They're shooting up everything they got at these missiles. They're running out of anti-aircraft and air defense stuff. So that's very interesting. But there's a potential for this thing to go bad. I think the fact that Trump is backpedaling so hard right now means that he ain't backpedaling by himself. There's other people saying to him, man, this is not good. If Israel keeps getting slammed like this for another week or two with these missiles, they're going to be a pile of rubble. And how are we going to explain that? So anyway, that's what I got to say about all of that.
Yeah, I tend to also agree with you in the sense that the most potent, viable aspect, if the U.S. is going to survive at all, the only thing that I could see that is relatively viable as a politically efficient power is the thing that has expressed itself in the MAGA movement as cultured, undereducated as its instincts often tend to be. It's still a significant factor.
It's effective. That's what they don't like. They don't want something to be effective. It's got its hold, and it might be done.
And its basic impulses are viable. Like we need to reindustrialize, get jobs back, stop the wars. Like these are fundamental facts of life that if humanity will make it through the current storm, those things have to be satisfied as conditions. So the fact that those are popular demands, good. Okay, now how that's going to manifest is where we get all sorts of disputes and confusion. But that being said, I know that Joaquin, on these points, I'll just throw it right at you based on what Garland just said. I know you got some slightly different modes of analysis and diagnostics that you've looked at. What's your assessment pertaining to both the MAGA card, Trump per se, and this broader question that Marty raised pertaining to the danger of great powers being pulled into this trap that could light the world on fire in some sort of a weird, terrible reset for some time?
Yeah, very good question. Well, like piggybacking on what Garland was saying, the way that I analyze Trump is I look at what he's saying, I make sense of what he's saying, but what's more important from what he says is what he does. And a lot of the things, you know, we talk about, you judge the tree by the fruit that it bears, right? You don't judge the tree by the tree standing next to it. You don't judge the tree by the rumors of other trees in the vicinity or the historians about trees or the botanist or the biologist. You judge the tree by the fruit that it bears. Now, another very good point that Garland made was that, as we learned from Ukraine, NATO's out of weapons. NATO's out of weapons. Now, a lot of what we have seen has been a burn off of NATO. In other words, like if you have all this military potential, right, and you know, as time goes on, you could have further corruption. You could have, like, when the Soviet Union collapsed and you had like missing weapons. There might have even been, actually, there was documented missing nukes. I mean, this is a catastrophe. The overproliferation of weapons during the Cold War, right? There was always this understanding that these weapons are going to wind up in places that, you know, everyone's going to say we didn't want them to, but somebody did want them to, you see. And so I see actually what's happening in Israel is them burning off, very similar to NATO. And I actually have a very different analysis in terms of like what has happened. I respect other opinions, and everything I've heard is very well reasoned and articulated, and I respect it. My opinion is a little bit different in that, number one, there has been a different phases of U.S. policy on Iran, right? You had, from the very beginning, from the Iranian Revolution, you actually had an immediate cooperation with the Reagan administration, right, with the hostages. Immediately. That's how Carter was defeated. Immediately. You had cooperation with Reagan and the Iranian revolutionaries, right? The hardliners. This is like, they were like 30 years old. This is like them getting right into power. This is like with the people that they had taken hostage, right? And then immediately after that, you had, you know, despite, of course, you know, the history of the Iranian Revolution, you know, the problems with the Seven Sisters, the British control, what the revolution was about, but it was also a revolution to stop the Tudeh party and the communists from taking over, you know, and when you had a lot of the people of the new left today, like I call like the neo-communists were up in arms over the assassination of Soleimani. Well, you know, if you were an Iranian communist, you have a picture of Soleimani that you've got X'd out and, you know, go to hell, and you're setting on fire because he executed thousands, tens of thousands of Iranian Tudeh communists. He was involved in that purge, you know, when the revolution devoured its own, when the theocrats came into power, number one. So when Soleimani was assassinated, we understood that this was something that Bolton and others did, Pompeo did, right, with or without Trump's consent. This had come only days after Trump had said, hey, you're not going to attack Iran. You know, remember what Bolton and Pompeo tried to set up with the planes going over Iran? One was an unmanned drone. The other had people in it, but they had the one with the people in it, transponder turned off. They flew them on top of each other. So you have one radar signature. Oh, it's a drone. Oh, but now you shot down Americans or whatever. We don't even know what really happened. We don't even know what really happened if Americans got shot down and we just called it a drone. But Trump was being forced, again, pushed into this position by these neocon war hawks, right? Yes. And he said no. And the New York Times did a fake news piece. At the time I wrote about it, that's fake news. He did not call off the attack. He did not approve the attack. Two very big different things. Two very big different things. But they always wanted to make him look like he was unsure and backpedaling, didn't know what he was doing. My view is that what has happened with the Israeli attack was this. As you know, 63 days ago, Trump said, the agreement that I've made with Israel is that if we can get these negotiations done in that time, they will not attack you. and they have promised not to attack during the 60 days. Okay, that was an agreement that Trump was able to get Netanyahu to stick to. The bombing began on the 61st or 62nd day after that statement. So, of course, Trump had foreknowledge, right? Of course, Trump did not oppose these strikes because of the politics. You have AIPAC, the United States, and you have, of course, the legacy of investment into a project. Like from the realism, you think of Israel, you know, is this an investment or a liability? Like, in other words, like, what have we put into it? And like, where does this go? Like, is it a money pit or do we unwind?
Yeah.
Well, of course, Netanyahu says, this is a money pit, keep putting into it. We're not unwinding. Okay. I think that perhaps, and I'm not inside Netanyahu's mind. I'm certainly don't have ESP and I'm not in Trump's mind. I just look at what they're doing and what I've seen. And from what I've put together is that the Trump administration represents yet the second or third very big change of U.S. policy on Iran. So like U.S. policy on Iran over the past 4 decades has been marked by a lack of continuity, right? Defined by a lack of continuity of policy. You had, of course, like we said, with Reagan, you had, you know, the rhetoric of calling them a rogue state or calling them, you know, all of the anti Ayatollah propaganda coming from the Reagan administration, but they were the ones that worked with them on the hostage. They were the ones that worked with them on Iran-Contra, Ollie North. And remember, the Iranians at that time were involved in efforts, therefore, to destroy and kill indigenous and leftist movements in the FMLN, FSLN, and to support the Contras in places like El Salvador, Nicaragua during in that time. So there is blood on Iran's hands with that as well. Just for facts, or maybe I won't get invited on Iranian TV for saying that, but just for facts, it is a fact. So Iran would then proceed to cooperate with the Clinton administration, getting weapons into Mujahideen in Bosnia to destroy Yugoslavia through Croatia at that time. That's another fact. So the lack of continuity of policy on Iran from the U.S., right, has been one of the more incoherent things in let's say international relations over the past several decades, because a lot of people might be young, or they don't know the history, or they spend a lot of time with Iranian information sphere that, you know, talks well about itself. Both the Iranians and the Americans have a mutual interest in downplaying their collaboration and cooperation over the decades on a number of important things. Agreed. While understanding that, yes, you see, every country in the planet has a policy or a posture towards another country. So you can't say that the United States has a continuity of policy on Iran. Well, yeah, they have a continuity of having a policy, but what that policy has been markedly different from period to period to period. So every country has a policy on a country. So the United States then, went from the demonization in the 70s and 90s. It's demonization, but use. Like, we're going to use Iran for these things. To what extent was Iran involved in helping to moderate or mitigate groups in Iraq during the U.S. occupation, like that of Muqtada al-Sadr and the Al-Mahdi army? They were critical in stabilizing the occupation in such a way that, you know, there's a trade-off. It's reality. A lot of people don't really understand resistance and occupation politics and compromise, but the Al-Mahdi army, effectively backed by Iran, was part of the U.S. occupation in Iraq as a police and militia force that, on the other hand, did represent and protect, you know, Shia communities of Iraq from Sunni extremism that was being backed by Saudi Arabia and the U.S. and others. So, but this is the reality. So to understand that then takes us into, you know, the neocons in the time of the Bush II administration after the occupation of Iraq, like post 2003. That's where you get into this period that basically went on about 8 or 9 years and then ended, you know, in excuse me, just a moment. Sorry about that. It's Father's Day and my father's calling me. I should call him. So what has happened is that you've had pressure and exclusion and from the neocon policy from, you know, 2003 And what they noticed, what they learned is that if you put sanctions and try to ostracize Iran in the context of what even at the time was understood as the emerging multipolar world, right, you're only actually freeing them of control by Western banking institutions. I mean, they're going to be able to integrate into the Chinese and the Russian economies. You've got Brazil, you've got, I mean, India, right? The world has grown up. We're not living in the same material reality as we were when a lot of these plans were drawn up in 2005 or 2008, like Pathway to Persia and Which Way, whatever. So, you know, these are older ideas that no longer apply, but you can make people think that you're doing it because you've already written it down, as if Iranians don't have access to the internet and can't read these white papers themselves and make contingency plans, you know, opposed to that, right? So we have to really get beyond this kind of like low resolution take. And that's why I really appreciate being able to speak with, you know, brilliant analysts like Sieff and Nixon, who take a forensic, historical, journalistic approach, kind of really get beneath the surface. And so what I'm adding to this is that I see NATO's very weak. Israel's very isolated, both in terms of global public opinion, both in terms of the opinion in the United States. Like, you look at the question of Israel and Zionism is not even a partisan issue. It's more of an age issue. So it's like anyone under 50 is pretty much anti-Israel. So it's what I think happened in terms of like these attacks is that Trump understood that it was going to happen. And it's very difficult to oppose because this is going to be Israel operating and doing it. And I think he understood the political blowback that was gonna go down. I mean, you see, when was it Jeffrey Goldberg, whoever it was at the Atlantic that did the leaks on the signal leak story, you know, we focused on the leaks, but what it was that Vance was saying is that it was a bad strategic move for the U.S. to go kinetic against Yemen, right? So this kind of shows that you have this thinking in the administration. They understand, you know, where the problems lie. As you mentioned, Matt, you know, if the Iranians close the Strait of Hormuz, you're going to see oil go up above $200 a barrel, right? Just as predicted by Zhirinovsky, you know, decades ago in the Russian parliament. So I see this as something where Trump lost control and had no power in this, but people don't want to see Trump that way, you know, either on the MAGA side, and then of course those demonizing him. And I'm saying there's a lot of room in between where you can be against what Trump is doing and not demonize him, but just in those extremes, you get a lot of this, you understand? So, but I see that Trump actually did not have control, just like he didn't have control over the assassination of Soleimani. He didn't have control over Israel attacking Iran. And so, but he has to get in front of things because of the way that he does his politics and act like, yeah, this is my idea. Right. Terrific. Okay, great. And then he's got to do the backpedal, the shuffle, the dance that Garland so illustratively colored for us. So my view is that now we are in a new phase. Like, the Obama phase was about taking Iran and trying to integrate them into Western markets. That is not isolation, and that is not regime change. Right. These are new perspectives on this. You know, this is like transcending regime change or regime change reimagined. Reimagining regime change is the key concept here. You know, let it be called the Islamic Republic. Let it be run by the Ayatollah. Let them keep their laws and their courts. Let them keep their ideology. Right. But if their oligarchs are integrated into the Western market, it's the old Rothschild bit. Like, I don't care who's the government. Let me control the banking, and that's all I need. So that was the plan to bring Iran into the fold with JCPOA, right? Now, why would they want to do that? Because all of these stupid neocon moves to push, and don't get me wrong, there were neocons in the Obama administration, but the real policy difference on Iran with this, you see, was to bring Iran into the fold, not ostracize them. Why? Because they're just going to get built up stronger by Russia and China, which they did, and now they're not defeatable militarily right now. So all the white papers, all the experts, all the analysts, everyone knows, unless they're on the payroll, you know, from a military industrial company little side project, but, you know, anything you see even out of Rand Corporation or Brookings today that is credible shows that Iran cannot be economically isolated, nor can they be militarily defeated. So what I see the new approach from the U.S. on Iran, right, is to get in to Iran, to invest in Iran in their own nuclear projects through détente with Russia. Russia's is proposed to build 8 new nuclear facilities in Iran, right? So in the Russian side, you can have American investors and American energy companies and just other entrepreneurs investing at that level in that consortium. And then through just, an interlocking directorate with the 2 degrees, remove the separation to get around the old globalist model of sanctions. You don't even have to lift the sanctions on Iran because those are all designed around globalism. Like that's why sanctions on Russia didn't work. And likewise, these sanctions on Iran can't work anymore. And you're going to have the American side through Trump, through Putin, investing in Iranian nuclear. And that's the deal. That's what Netanyahu is just trying to get. This is like a Hail Mary from Netanyahu. This is like, we've got all this stored up stuff over decades. It's every day that goes by, the value and quality relative to new technologies, the relative quality of those weapons is degrading. They're becoming more and more useless, just like we've seen in conflict with Houthis, just like we've seen in Ukraine. So that's my piece on that.
Yeah, man. No, I mean, I appreciate the fact that you have the particular analysis. You're obviously much more optimistic, but you support it with a lot of solid lines of logic with evidence that I respect. So it should be taken very seriously as a hypothesis, which also, I mean, so the idea that the U.S. and Russians are in deeper collusion is a very important focal point. I guess that also means that you believe the START 2 treaty is not going to be sabotaged, but is also going to probably go ahead. Okay, that's well. So hovering over a lot of this, and you brought up the Rothschilds.
Well, ultimately, we'll get back to START 2. I don't know if this attempt at détente will work, but ultimately we will.
Okay. So you brought up the Rothschilds. I'd like to get Marty and Garland's take on this as well. Because I've been looking at the chats, and at least 9 or 10 times different people have brought up the issue of foreign manipulation in this whole dynamic, with a special focus on something that Lavrov brought up a few days ago at a conference in Russia, as well as the Russian ambassador to the UN. Gray Zone has been covering this quite a bit. Is British intelligence influencing both Operation Spiderweb, launched into Russia, using covert trucks staffed with tons of drones that were released, carrying out damage, similar in modus operandi in many ways to what was done in Iran by Israel as well. So it seems like there's some overlap there. Let's just say that. And I think everybody's been, to varying degrees here, paying attention to the evolution and dynamics of British intelligence operations, both inside of the USA and globally. So throwing it first at
let me just, if I may,
go ahead.
If I may just ask a question to help your question a little bit, if I may, respectfully.
Okay.
Why did the Russians at the UN the other day specifically exclude the United States and enlisting who was involved in supporting Israel in the attack? Okay, as a rhetorical,
Yes.
and then
Sure.
I'll shut up.
Okay, good. So maybe Marty then Garland, same question. Marty, what do you think about that? The British involvement in things.
First of all, I think it's very likely in both cases for several reasons. First of all, I never thought the Ukrainians were doing this by themselves. Never. They don't have the organizational capability and internal security to do it. They could not pull this together, certainly not after what they've gone through and the enormous losses and attrition they've been suffering. And the guy I regard as the outstanding American military analyst on this, retired U.S. Army Colonel Doug McGregor, eminent military historian, and also a man who's actually won major battles in war. He commanded the destruction of the Iraqi Revolutionary Guard when Iraq was regarded as the 4th most powerful military in the world in the 1991 Gulf War, Battle of 73 Easting, I think. And Doug McGregor's analysis on this is I don't want to paraphrase it because I may garble it, but it's worth going to. It's worth looking at his recent assessments on Twitter and X. But certainly 2 things. First, the British involvement in Ukraine in the drone thing there, I think, is very major. And there's another key factor to it. And it fits with what Joachim has just pointed out. Again, yet another point you point out, again of the greatest significance, that Foreign Minister Lavrov, a very serious, careful, meticulous man, did not include the United States with his condemnation of the Brits. And this is of crucial importance because what we have seen repeatedly since the start of the Ukraine war is Biden and his people and Blinken, to their eternal shame and eternal judgment and hellfire, I would say, encouraged the French and the British, especially the British, to block all efforts at peace and settlement and reconciliation in Ukraine, first of all. And you have this extraordinary 100-year treaty that the British signed with Ukraine, which is a fantasy which will never be allowed by anybody else to come to practice. But if it was, it would give Britain in the same imperial control over the economy of Ukraine that they had for 100 years over the economy of China from 1840 to 1943-44, until Franklin Roosevelt forced the British to give up their control of Chinese excise, customs, tax raising, basically revenue raising and control of imports and exports to the entire economy of China. Nobody ever discusses this. It's there in the historical record. It's not been buried. It's not a non-fact. It's easily documented. It's ignored. And they made the secret protocol with Ukraine, which the Ukrainians themselves leaked, gives Britain for the next 100 years the same control over the territory of Ukraine and the resources of Ukraine, if they can get away with it. Point one. Point two, in 1956, a furious President Dwight Eisenhower reined in the British and the French and destroyed the governments of both Britain and France because they launched an imperial attack in collusion with Israel against Egypt that he feared would bring in the Soviets and set off World War III. And Eisenhower was furious. And Eisenhower was rather like Reagan. He was a deceptively kindly, easygoing guy. And he was in person a very kind man and a very easygoing man. But he wasn't Irish like Reagan, but he had the Irish temperament to him. If he was truly outrageously crossed, he became mean as shit and hard as nails immediately. He destroyed the British government of Anthony Eden and brought him down in ruins. And Eden had supposedly been a friend and colleague of his for 15 years since the early days of World War II. And he destroyed the entire French Fourth Republic by discrediting it in cracking down on the Suez thing. He was not going to let Britain and France, which only survived on the sufferance of the United States of America, to set off World War III, or even to jeopardize his re-election chances. And he cracked down on Israel. Now, of course, it's 70 years ago. It's a different world. But what was the result in American domestic political terms of turning on our gallant ally, Britain and France, our special relationship, beloved Israel, which he also cracked down on, forced out of Sinai? Eisenhower was re-elected in one of the most sweeping re-election victories in American history, only 2 months later in November 1956, right on the heels of cracking down. But today we see the opposite. We see the President of the United States is being defied by the British and the French, backed by major elements of his own deep state. And this is something that was already happening in Eisenhower's time. Eisenhower did not know what the CIA was doing with reverse engineering of advanced pioneering technology and what other dirty games they were getting up to at Area 51, and the CIA wasn't telling him. And Eisenhower finally sent his own people in only after mobilizing at Fort Bragg, I think in Texas, and certainly at U.S. forts in Kansas. He said, I am going to send the Army of the United States into Area 51 as a literal invasion unless you, the agency, open up your advanced technology to me. And what scholars of this extraordinary fighting and divisions in the secret state have pointed out is this marks the start of something that led to the assassination of President Kennedy. That already by 1955 and 56, the President of the United States, and a powerful president from the military background himself, a very powerful president, knew that he was already losing control of his own deep state. The United States government had become so wealthy, so powerful, so disorganized, so disheveled, that elements of it could hive off and go rogue, and they could not be effectively always reined in. And of course, this culminates in the coup of November the 22nd, 1963. But this is what we see today. Britain and France would not dare to do what they are doing in Ukraine if they did not have major elements of the United States deep state within this country behind them. And those same elements are in league with Soros, and those same elements come up with the no king slogan. No king. Who is the king? King George III was the king. King is evil. Trump is the king. And as that idiot friend of mine in the Middle East, of all places, though he's not an Arab people would be more sensible. Actually, have a Canadian background, I regret to say, Matt, but a very different kind of Canadian from you, Cynthia, I hasten to add. Well, what did my old friend of 50 years say to me? Oh, if only we could get rid of Trump and Putin, how wonderful the world would be. And the asshole did not realize that he was calling for World War III and the assassination of the two leaders who, with all their limitations and all the degrees we might rightly distrust them or be frustrated by them or pull our hair out over them, are nevertheless trying to talk to each other and trying to rein in the most extreme elements on their own side. And the one other point I'll add here is, again, back to President Kennedy. The CIA, we now know, and Curtis LeMay, who had basically run U.S. Air Force as his private and Strategic Air Command as his private fiefdom for 16 years up to 1963, deliberately sent overflights over to the Soviet Union at the height of the Cuban Missile Crisis to provoke a confrontation. And President Kennedy and even Robert McNamara, a man I genuinely loathe, but on this occasion where it really mattered, even McNamara was on the side of the angels. And Kennedy said to McNamara, a naive business high-tech guy, the Elon Musk of the day, who thought you could press a few buttons, bring in some AI, and it'll all work perfectly. And he was appalled that the president of the United States himself was being defied by his own top generals who took the oath of loyalty, who wore all these ribbons, who were such men of honor. But President Kennedy had served in the United States Navy at a low level in World War II, and he was experienced, and he was street smart, and he was exceptionally intelligent. And what did President Kennedy say? My apologies to the ladies who are president. This is what President John F. Kennedy literally said. There will always be some son of a bitch who doesn't get the message. Now, today we have a lot of son of a bitches who don't want to get the message and are rejecting it. And that is one of my biggest concerns, that the more effective President Trump will look with all his contradictions that my friends and colleagues have rightly pointed out and are completely real. If he, in a way, this is what's keeping him alive. If Trump does look that he is going to rein in Netanyahu too much, or rein in the neocon project to dream of annihilating Iran too much, how long is he going to last? I hope he will survive it. Because, and I hope Vice President Vance will survive it, because I think both, and Secretary of State Rubio. But if you see the president removed, and somehow through tragic or necessary circumstances, somehow the vice president has to be removed or bypassed, or somehow the Secretary of State has to be removed or bypassed, it will be obvious what's going on, even if it's all too late.
Very well, I will say, I did watch not too long ago this A24 movie. I don't know if you guys saw that, Civil War.
That's the Obama movie, right?
Yeah. And it's sophisticated as far as the predictive programming. A lot of these A24 movies, they do something I've never seen before as far as sophistication of putting out predictive programming storylines. And this one basically takes place in a not so distant, U.S. future when a certain Republican president is in his third term, and he's already done this big, Antifa massacre a couple of years earlier, and has shut down a big branch of the FBI. And but he's a bad guy, and the California and Texas have broken off. And spoiler alert, basically, the audience is really encouraged to identify or catharsize with the rebellion, the pink nail polish painted militia groups that are going into an insurrection to take over Washington D.C. and ultimately murder the president in the Oval Office. And you're taken in a journey where it is dehumanizing. It's designed to dehumanize anybody who's conservative on the one hand, and take you through a place where, as a young, especially a younger under 30 audience, is supposed to live through the experience of taking joy out of killing the press secretary, the president, all these things. So there's definitely scenarios being gamed out. We know that the general intention is there to nudge things in a certain orientation towards chaos. I've seen also the Canadian government financed a policy horizons report funded by Mark Carney or overseen by Mark Carney and Justin Trudeau, like 2004, which called for, how is Canada going to engage with the US once it goes into civil war? And there's a whole bunch of like end time scenarios that they game out, kind of like a Rand Corp report. So there's all of these weird points of evidence of this higher agency that is trying to induce chaos, both in Iran and as well as in the United States itself. That concerns me, that I think is tied to something bad that has tentacles inside of the US, especially inside of Canada. And as Marty went through it, in the only way only Marty can do, it does have a certain coloring of the city of London behind it. Garland, have you been looking at this stuff? What is your take on some of these foreign agencies manipulating things into chaos? Or what's your take, man?
Well, a couple of things. Let's not forget the whole Trump. Remember, the whole Trump-Russia thing emanated out of London. Right?
Yes.
That started in London and emanated out of London. It was obviously an MI6 operation, right? I mean, I could go on and on. Where the hell are the Skripals? I think we know they are not among the living. They have left this mortal plane at the hands of MI6 at this point, right? Sadly and unfortunately, but that's pretty clear. I recall something interesting that I would commend our viewers to watch. It's on Rumble. Scott Ritter did something a while back called Agent Zelensky. Segment 1 and 2, where he explained what this was, I don't know, maybe a year ago, I don't know, where he explained why he believed that Zelensky was an MI6 agent. And it was very well done. And in hindsight, even then, it was very well presented, and I think it was very clear that Zelensky was an MI6 agent. One of the things that I learned about the Ukraine conflict was the concept of a division of labor, right? So what? The MI6 people, the Brits, they're really good at the political manipulation. So they're in there setting up the Zelensky government, as it were. The French, with the, the French Foreign Legion and all, they're good at mercenaries. So their job is to make sure mercenaries are going in and out. The United States, they're the muscle. They're the brawn. They provide the weapons, the things like that. And so there was a division of labor there, people doing what they could and what they do best. And now they're having issues. Trump wants, and certain people in the U.S. want the hell out of there. But the bottom line is this machine has traditionally for a while worked together. The French needed the Sahel region and all so they could rob the crap out of them, so they could use AFRICOM bases and intelligence to continue to suppress the people who were pushing back in Africa and continue to rob Africa. And so this empire kind of came together and was working together so everybody could get their piece of the pie, right? But in recent years, as the U.S. starts getting, our economic model, shall we say, is not working so well anymore, right? The U.S. starts backing out, saying, this ain't working for us. Maybe we'll even eat some of our own vassals, deindustrialize steal their stuff. And there's no honor amongst thieves. And so one of the things you're seeing is no honor amongst thieves. These various parts of the empire that had been working together for the benefit of all, now that things aren't working for any of them, they're fighting amongst each other. I think there's a certain level of that. Part of the fighting amongst each other that you saw, a huge expression of it was the Brits and MI6 going after the Trump administration early. To me, that's the first big, real, massive, out in the open battle that you saw in the empire. This political intelligence battle going on that was kind of open. They were pretty open about it. They used everything. They used the media. They used it all. Now I think we're getting to a point where they're in deep and serious trouble. And this punch at Iran has tremendous implications because, when it comes to self-defense and fighting, you're most vulnerable if you swing and miss. You know what I mean? If I punch at you, a big old hook, and that punch, you duck and it misses, and my arm's all the way over here, everything's open. You can punch, kick, bite. You can do whatever you want to. You can knock me out because I swung and missed. And they've swung at Iran. And the big problem they have is this: for all of the potential disastrous things that could happen as a result, right? If this thing falls apart as quick as it appears to be, and they miss, then, you know, Russia and China, everybody's in the driver's seat at that point. They have, and a big thing that happened out of this, the huge thing is Trump, and that's one of the reasons they hate Trump, because he's not particularly adept at the machinations of empire, right? It was so stupid of him to admit, yeah, it was all a fraud. The whole time we were supposed to negotiate, but we weren't really. We were doing this. And then they used the IAEA, you know, hours before the attack. The IAEA comes out and says, oh, yeah, Iran was doing something wrong. And anybody can look at this and say they used the whole machine. They lied. They cheated, blah, blah, blah. So now Trump's saying, oh, we can get a deal. There's no deals to be done. There's no more deals with anybody, nobody to talk to, no more institutions. All of these games that a lot of the tools that they've been using, because now they're so openly exposed, won't be available to them anymore. And this is interesting. It really, you know, we can hope and pray that we get out of this alive and there's, you know, no nuclear war or whatever. If that happens, man, the empire has weakened itself in a way that we could never have imagined by punching at Iran.
Yeah, I think that says it all. We're rounding out the top of the second hour slowly. I'm going to give people a chance to just say some wrap up closing words. If there's anything you want the audience to really take away from your message, I mean, I think Garland just said it really poignantly, exactly where we're at and what the stakes are. But I'll throw it at Joaquin, then Marty, and then Garland. If you want to say a last word, I'll throw something at you too. Joaquin, very quickly, what do you want the audience to walk away with and have in their mind as they go into the coming week?
In my view, Netanyahu has been conned, and that Trump's statements in support, in his enthusiasm of the strikes, are part of the illusion that was created, and that he had very little control, in fact, over what Israel was going to do when you take the combined influence of AIPAC and what Israel can do on its own and Mossad. And but Trump can never be seen as being weak or have had something done to him, and that's both a personality aspect of Trump's ego, but also a realistic way of doing power. I mean, it's not he is the president of the United States, after all, not pretending to be. So, you know, having the idea that Israel pulled something off on him, right? So he wouldn't like that, and he would seek to get in front of that and say, I was in favor of that. But clearly, you can hear from Vance, you can hear from other people. Very clearly, you talk about the controlled media sphere, the limited hangouts, and the role of Tucker Carlson in, you know, damage control for this insurgent regime in the United States, MAGA. This is, I think, a bigger picture, and we, as developed and as intricate as everything has shown to be, we should then appreciate that the rule of parsimony, Occam's razor, applies. That we really have to look very hard and deep at the Russian role in this, and why they are providing, why they are affirming Rubio's view that the United States is not directly involved. Now, I think the United States was directly involved. I think there's evidence of that already coming from Aegis SM2 remains and other things, including some of Trump's statements as well, as you said. However, now, why be so public about it, right? As Nixon mentioned, well, that's very foolish. I would say that's possible. Another alternative view could be that, you know, he's got this in electric lights and, you know, neon lights so brightly saying this stuff, and it's very glowy, precisely because that's the script that Israel needs to eat up. And I think that it's Israel that finds itself ultimately isolated here, and the United States is going to have, you know, regime change reimagined in Iran without removing the Islamic Republic, without removing the Ayatollah, just by getting in. What they wanted in Iran was to investment in energy, investment in nuclear, and they want to be able to get in, and Russia is going to pave the way for the United States to invest into Iran without any of the messes that you've had historically. Right now, we just need to have Israel burn off whatever it has, and they only got days or weeks of it, and then that's it. And Iran's going to be there, Iran's going to be standing, and then we're going to be talking about peace after that. And Iran will enrich at 3.5% or 5 or 10% or whatever. And I think pretty soon, if that's the way that Iran goes, the world's going to have to accept Iran as a nuclear power.
All right. Again, very optimistic analysis, and one which doesn't involve thermonuclear World War III Holocaust. So, I'm always hungry for points of hope. Marty, what do you think about that?
It's rare for me to disagree with Joaquin, and it's even more rare for me. I always find you sober me up because you pointed out so often to me things I didn't want to see in the world. Today, I hope you're right. And I will buy a full dinner, not just a round of drinks, to be only too happily wrong with you. I look forward we can celebrate together on this on a future day. As you know, that's the optimistic scenario at one end of the bell curve. I'm at the other end of the bell curve. President Lincoln said, "A house divided against itself cannot stand." And the federal government of the United States and its political system is totally divided and splintered against itself, which is why we see the fluttering all over the place here. And I think the Russians recognize this, and we have seen this before. Foreign Secretary Lavrov, obviously with the full approval of President Putin, is trying to support the constructive elements in the United States, currently led by Secretary of State Rubio. And I think Vice President Vance is there too. And the president wobbles with this as well. But if the president can be removed from the scene, then the vice president and the secretary of state, God forbid, could also be very quickly neutered and sidelined and discredited. This happens all the time when there are coups that are, of course, never called coups. Sir John Harrington, and this was the motto of all things of the John Birch Society. I never dreamed I would ever approvingly quote something that they approved of, but a poem by Sir John Harrington, godson of Queen Elizabeth I of England, 400 years ago. Treason doth never prosper. What's the reason? Why, if it prosper, none dare call it treason. The one thing I'll add to this is there was a prophecy of everything we've seen through here. When true prophecy is done, they don't come from these vile, money-grubbing, fraudulent, obscene pigs of Sunday morning cult preachers on American television. Don't come from them at all. This is true prophecy. It was on British television, independent television, a series which you can still, it hasn't been removed yet, it's still on YouTube, Whoops Apocalypse, a 6-part comedy series starring John Cleese about thermonuclear war and the end of the world. And it was made in 1982. And what does it have? It has a Bible-quoting head of the CIA sending the son of the Shah of Iran, is this sounding familiar, into Iran to topple the Ayatollahs, right? At the same time, Israel is being armed to the teeth by the CIA and the US government with a quark bomb, the most dangerous bomb in existence, being brought in by a mercenary, who is not accountable to any of the regular armed forces of the United States. The mercenary, who of course is called the Jackal, is played by John Cleese in one of his most gleeful and wickedly mischievous and very funny roles. And of course, they bungle the whole thing. The bomb goes off when it's being shuttled towards Jerusalem through Bethlehem. So the last thing you see is a bunch of Arabs on camels and eager Protestant fundamentalists in Israel, and they see a new star appearing over Bethlehem, and they say, "Oh, look, isn't this wonderful? It's the second coming. It's everything we've lived for." But of course, it's the beginning of a thermonuclear explosion that fries them all. And that's how the series ends. And there's 3 hours of this, and it's all on YouTube for free. Go and look it up, start reading it.
Yeah.
It's 1982, and it's the world we're in today. CIA dirty tricks. The British government up to its neck in it. A British prime minister who, like Netanyahu, is a delusional madman, who imagines that he's Superman and wears a Superman cape beneath his costume. And I'm giving a lot away here. Spoiler alert. At the end of the show, the rest of the British cabinet, faced with thermonuclear world war, goes mad as well. So they dress up as the rest of the Justice League, as Wonder Woman and Green Lantern and Batman and Hawk. The Minister of Defense, the Foreign Secretary of Britain, comes to a cabinet meeting dressed up as Hawkman, the Winged Wonder, complete with his 6-foot-wide wingspan. You've got to see it to appreciate it. This is the world we're in. This is our world. This is where we are today.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I believe that, and there is a lot of delusion carrying people forward who should know better and be more grounded, and that includes also the general mass base of the population. I think one thing that's different from what I've understood to be a cultural attribute of the 1970s and especially 80s was that there was a better recognition, perhaps due to the fact that it was the Cold War and people had been trained to do traumatic drills for nuclear Holocaust scenarios since they were kids. That was destructive to the minds of a lot of baby boomers. But that being said, people took the danger of nuclear war much more seriously than today's generation, especially of those under the age of 50. Who were largely came into their identities out after the Soviet Union had melted down, and largely in the post 9/11 age, whereby the scenarios of nuclear war usually only emerge in the context of entertainment, whether in the scenarios of the video games that I'm playing, of the movies and the shows that I watch, that all seem to have, if they're going to talk about the future, 99% chance it's going to be some post-apocalyptic future scenario that's going to be something we've been trained to identify with. So the idea of the reality, or even the idea that nuclear bombs don't even exist, right? That's actually a new thing I've encountered that's really prevalent in the under 50 crowd as well, especially, though older people also believe it, that atomic energy is a hoax. It doesn't exist. So that's another aspect of it, right? So, but there's a detachment from the weight of the dangers and the fact that there are thousands of protests underway that are being planned. Not a bad thing to have protests, but you want to protest the right things. You want to get out there. And and in the 80s, people were championing and protesting World War III. They were celebrating when Reagan would open up the door to have dialogue with his Russian counterparts. That was a good thing. Today, there's no demand for that in the mass base, not at least enough that I'm seeing. So I'll throw it at you, Garland, last one. What do you think we're at right now in terms of the culture, in terms of what's needed, both from the masses as well as from the leadership? And then we'll round it out for today's presentation.
Well, we're at an interesting time right now because, they're in desperation. There were a lot of people, you had the Trump base and you had people that always vote Republican. And then you had a bunch of people who were in desperation, said any place is better than here. So they either stayed home or they voted for Trump, feeling, man, things have gotten so bad. Maybe he'll be different. And now, 5 months into the Trump administration, they're looking and they're starting to realize, this machine is going to do what it does. You know what I mean? And regardless of who's there, and if the person there doesn't want to go 100% with the machine, then they'll do it anyway. The other thing too is this. And I'm just going to say, look, if there's going to be nuclear war, we can't do anything about that. And we're all dead. So it wouldn't matter for me to comment on it. So what, you know what I mean? At that point, it's no point in commenting on it if you're going to die. So I think we should comment on what happens if we live, which I believe we will. And that is I just read something a second ago, and it was some release from the Trump administration that said Trump vetoed the Netanyahu's plan to kill the Khamenei or whatever days before this happened, right? And I'm like, okay, so he's trying to oh no, I didn't want to kill you, duck out of it. Here's the thing. I don't know. It's obvious, why they're doing that. No one will ever believe anything that Donald Trump says on the world scale again. The level of damage that he has done to his credibility on the world stage is incalculable. It is incalculable. As soon as I read that, immediately, in the past, I might have thought, I wonder if he said it or not. Now, Anybody who reads anything that is released by the Trump administration under any circumstances, and it says Trump said this, they're going to say, why are they telling that lie? If he talks to the Russians, hey, we want to sit down and talk, they're going to say, all right, everything we know he says is a lie. Why is he saying that lie? If he talks to the Chinese, they're going to be looking behind their back. Where are you going to sit? They're going to say, I'm sitting up against the wall here. Why? So you can't get behind me, because you'll stick a knife in my damn back. And everything he says, like the Chinese, the Russians, anybody are going to be like, okay, afterwards, we got to meet and figure out why he said that. We know it's a lie, and he knows he's trying to use it to stab us in the back. So Donald Trump has put himself 5 months into, not that who the hell believed him that much anyway, but I'm saying 5 months in, he's got less credibility than Joe Biden, than anyone. I don't know of a president in my lifetime, if ever, that has lost the level of credibility for himself and his nation on the international stage that Donald Trump has. What he's done in 2 days in admitting everything I said was a lie, but far worse. It wasn't just a lie. It was a setup so I could stick a knife in their back. Even in America, if he's talking to somebody, you know, for domestic policy, everybody's got to look at him and say, yeah, what's this up to? So Donald Trump is, you know, is effectively, as any kind of a negotiator, spokesman, anything is effectively done 5 months in. That's it. His word means nothing. It's worse than nothing. If my word means nothing, you'll ignore me. But if my word is always used as a tool to get you, then it's worse than, you're not going to ignore me. You're going to see everything I say as an attack, and accurately so. And he's earned that. And that's where he is. But that is spread across the whole U.S. right now. No deals with anybody ever under any circumstances. That's it.
Yeah, I think this was a very sobering broadcast today, and I appreciate that all of you guys have different ways of looking and analyzing and hypothesizing about the causal nexus behind much of the complexity, which gets a little bit confusing. And you know, for most people, just trying to stay on top of where the world is at moment to moment. I know myself, I've been barraged ever since the strikes began. I mean, I'm always following the news, but even more so, just to see, you know, every two minutes, something massive and world changing can now be sprung on us. So on any level, whether it's chaos in the West, the impending systemic breakdown, which is built into the Western system, that's a factor sort of hovering over a lot of these geopolitical discussions, pushing things onward, as well as a lot of end times fanatics who believe somehow that they could help God out by accelerating the end times, and and maybe the Messiah will come either for the first time or the second time or the Mahdi or whatever. Like, there's so many very disturbing, religiously fanatic and politically empowered ideologies in play right now. A lot of them have been religiously engineered over generations by intelligence agencies that have a very long game view at the world. And obviously there's some very sick ideas, some very good ideas that has allowed us historically to overcome the types of traps that have been set for us throughout the past and that are being set for us right now. So, and I mean, you know, the fact that, again, the Civil War itself, the first one in the 19th century, I'll just throw it out there for those who don't know, that was also a foreign instigated intelligence agency run occult with occult aspects to it. Anybody trying to, you know, describe the first Civil War without identifying the causal role of the Scottish Rite Freemasonry in the North or in the South would not do well. They won't actually have a proper idea of how this was done to undo the victories of 1776 in a divide to conquer strategy. They wouldn't also understand how these same agencies never disappeared after the Civil War, but simply rebranded, regrouped, and, you know, set up things like the FBI that oversaw the murder of many presidents, many civil rights leaders, many people who actually were moving America into a more sane orientation, let alone what was behind 9/11, what was behind the crafting of this whole clean break doctrine that oversaw the murder of Yitzhak Rabin, and that has a certain idea of bringing in a third Solomon temple, as part of an initiation ritual to spark some sort of a weird end time scenario. So these are ideas in play, good, bad, alike. Joaquin, again, I appreciate your assessment of the possibility of sanity somehow navigating behind the scenes. Garland, Marty, I appreciate you guys as well so much, being able to just bring us a sobering assessment of where we're at and the sort of aura of confusion and self-contradiction which is baked into so many layers of the system, including Trump himself. And anybody saying that they know exactly what's going on at this point, I would say garbage.
Yes.
I don't believe you.
Yes, agreed.
It's good to have that humility. And I think we're all like flexible enough to sort of take in data as it comes and shift accordingly our hypotheses according to the outcome. And as we all said, by their fruits you shall judge them. So we'll see what these fruits actually are as this tree grows, and we'll see if they're poison or not. For everybody watching, I mean, I do apologize for not staying on top of the live chats. Very robust. I'm so happy to see the activity in the chats. That shows a lot of engagement. Also, for those who threw in a few dollars to the super chats, highly appreciate your support. Thank you so much. For everybody listening as well, like and subscribe, and also share this recording when it goes out, and help us promote this, because I'd really like this Dialogos platform to really go viral and for this to grow massively in the coming weeks and months ahead. We need these types of discussions focused on analysis of causes and solutions to be much more popular. So thank you to all of our guests, Marty, Garland, Joaquin. I look forward to future chats, and thanks for all of the live audience. Till next time.
Thank you.